Hey, how's it going? Welcome back to ThinkView, and this is NK. I have spent very long time using the most affordable iPad from Apple, the iPad A16. And honestly, I think that instead of spending thousands of dollars on the newest iPad Pro, well, this iPad is actually the iPad that most people needs. Especially after the iPadOS 26 update, I really don't understand why you would buy an iPad Pro anymore. And in today's videos, I want to share with you guys my in-depth review with this iPad and also explaining why this is the only iPad you should consider buying. Now, let's get started. When the iPad A16 first launched, to be honest, I didn't expect much from it. You see, the design looked exactly the same as the iPad Gen 10. The chip inside is still the A16 that reused from the iPhone 15. The camera hasn't changed and the display is also the same one, still using a non-laminated panel with a visible gap between the touch glass and the display underneath. Overall, I felt like there was almost nothing new here, like a tasteless refresh from Apple. But after spending more time with it, I actually think that this is a good deal. Now, if you look at other tablets, especially from Android, you see that most of them are rely on powerful hardware to compensate for a unreliable and weak software. On paper, the spec might look great, like higher refresh rate display, more eye-catching panel, and the hardware are the one of the highest number. But once you start using them, well then you start to encounter countless of problems like stuttery, like laggy, and sometimes even frustrating. But the iPad A16 is the complete opposite. Here, the software is what carries the hardware. The display is objectively not great by today's standard, with a 60Hz refresh rate and a non-laminated panel even in 2025. But in daily use, you almost never experience lag or stuttery. That's simply because iPadOS is extremely well optimized. Also, the update to iPadOS 26 makes this iPad even more compelling. This is a free update, but significantly improved multitasking, allowing you to open multiple windows and work in a way that feels very similar to using an iPad Pro. In the past, features like State Manager was limited to only the iPad Pro's lineup, but with the iPadOS 26, now all the iPad can have the windowing apps. You can resize windows freely and even open as many windows as you want, which completely changes how capable a standard iPad feels. Now, when comparing this iPad A16 with something like the iPad Air or even the iPad Pro, I think that we first need to be realistic about how people actually use an iPad. Some people buy an iPad and thinking that they will do serious stuff like editing videos, like doing heavy work, like replacing their laptop. But in reality, most of them are just using this iPad as a Netflix machine. And this is from my personal observation, but people mainly use the iPad for studying, reading, watching movies, and general entertainment. And for those use cases, the iPad A16 performing extremely well, especially considering its price. Of course, the iPad Pro is undeniably more enjoyable to use, especially with the 120Hz refresh rate make everything buttery smooth. But the price is simply too high for most users. And that's why I think that this iPad A16 is the iPad that makes sense for everyone. Now, of course, there are some limitations with the iPad, especially when it comes to external displays. The iPad A16 cannot output an external monitor in full screen and only support like screen mirroring, which is something that would affect those users who work seriously on the iPad. That being said though, if your workflow rely on external monitor support, well then you would end up using a MacBook anyways. For lighter productivity tasks, the iPad A16 doesn't feel very different from the iPad Pro in daily use. In terms of performance, I know that this iPad using an older chip from the iPhone 15, but then performance never been an issue on iPad. If you choose iPad based purely on performance, honestly I think that is unnecessary. Whether you're using an iPad Gen 10 or an iPad Air with an M3 chip, the user interface experience feels almost identical. And trust me, Apple Silicon still offers far more performance than most people actually need from their iPad. Now, display is one of the clear compromise on the iPad A16. Because it's non-laminated, it reflects more light and doesn't look as vibrant as the display on the iPad Air or the iPad Pro, which also has better color coverage. When comparing them side by side, even an older iPad Air M1 looks better. However, in normal daily use, the display on the A16 still looks good enough, and unless you are very picky about color accuracy, the difference is hard to notice. Battery life is kinda similar to other iPad from Apple lineup. On days when I'm taking notes continuously with the screen always on, I still get around 6 or 7 hours, which is still more than enough for a full day of studying. For lighter use such as reading or watching videos, the battery life is even better, making everything reliable for everyday use. The speaker setup is technically divided into 4 speaker area, but in reality, it functions as a dual speaker system. Compared to the iPad Pro 11 with the M4 chip, the soundstage isn't as wide and the stereo separation isn't as impressive when watching movies. However, for music, gaming, and general daily use, the sound quality is perfectly fine and there's nothing to complain about. The iPad A16 using a Touch ID fingerprint sensor, and although it feels a little bit loose than the other button from the iPad, it still has a very responsive speed. No matter how quickly you touch it, it unlocks instantly. The iPad A16 has also switched to USB-C, but charging speed remains quite slow. For my testing, it takes about 2 hours and 15 minutes to fully charge this device. That said, slow charging has always been a thing for iPad lineup, not just this model alone. Overall, compared to older iPad, this iPad A16 is still a better device, with double the storage to 128 gigs and also more powerful chips. Compared to Android tablet in the same price range, it delivers a much more reliable and polished user experience. This might not be a groundbreaking product with impressive specs on paper, but when you consider how people actually use iPad for studying, watching content, note-taking, drawing, and gaming, the iPad A16 performs extremely well. At its price, this is one of the most competitive iPad that Apple has ever released, and for most users, this truly is the only iPad that they need. But what is your thought with the iPad A16? Let me know in the comment section down below. And don't forget to hit the subscribe button so you won't miss any upcoming videos about the latest tech. Now, thanks for watching. This is NK from ThinkView, and see you guys next time.